Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Let's Play Seiken Densetsu 3. My name is Natural20 and I'm alongside the man called Coolguy, and you are watching the intro.
What's up, y'all?
So yeah, they're just going through the world being trapped in darkness like it always is in every single game. And how god beasts were destroyed by the goddess of mana at some point using the sword of mana. It's almost as if we might have to fight god beasts later in the game.
This always reminds me of those old like epic Nordic myths that go on, because they're really vague, but you can tell something incredibly hardcore happened.
Exactly, I really like this, and I really like the kind of weird art they've got going in the background of this intro. I don't know why, but for something that is not doing very much, it expresses the feelings of what's in the words a little bit better. And now we get to see the world in Glorious Mode 7.
This is the realm of mana, if I remember correctly, as opposed to the physical realm. But yeah, so I mean, if anybody has ever played Secret of Mana 1, actually, I suppose most folks watching this have also played this game. That's fine, because we're playing a ROM hack to keep it more interesting. But you know, I mean, it's kind of amuses me because it's pretty clear that that they are direct sequels. The world looks just entirely different. God only knows how many eras have passed in between the two.
I like it because it gives the idea that, you know, the myths from the previous game, or what happened in the previous game, has become myth now, because so much time has passed on.
Mm-hmm.
And now we see the heroic fairies trying to save the realm of mana.
That goes about as well as you would expect.
Yeah, they're not doing great, are they? They seem to be falling back. Apart from this one at the front, who seems to be trying a little bit harder than everybody else. But yeah, the introduction of this game goes on a while. We were chatting about this before, actually. It's a good
These
one.
sorts of long intros don't really make it into modern games, really, just because the data always says that basically everybody thumbs through them, which I feel is a shame.
I feel like I understand why people do it, but equally, it does feel like a bit of a waste, because it means you can set up a scene really well, and you just tend not to do it. Anyway.
Yeah, when you're playing a game, you expect to get in there, and not getting in there for a good 5 minutes or whatever just feels really bad. Yeah. Speaking of getting in there, though,
we're getting right into it. So, as we mentioned earlier, Seiken Densetsu 3 is, I think, the fourth Secret of Mana game. It should be called Secret of Mana 4, but it was never released outside of Japan. And unlike, I think, the other Secret of Mana games, we've got 6 characters, of which we can pick 3. And that is going to be the first decision that Thread has to make. So, the characters that we've got here have different stories attached to them as well. So not only does each individual character have an individual beginning area, which is completely different to every other character, there are 3 separate final bosses and 3 separate dungeons at the end of the game that you'll also need to pick out. Which is very, very interesting, and means that the character choices at the beginning of this game are going to be really, really important for the kind of run that you want to see.
Ensemble casts like this were very important back in this era. Also, during it was the same sort of era. Remember as Final Fantasy VI, where, you know, a large ensemble cast with no direct main character was released, and everybody loved it.
Yeah, it seems to work out, because I think with them wanting to emphasize the gameplay more, people tend to project more onto certain characters than others. So having an ensemble just means that people seem to enjoy the game more because they find that one character they really like and keep playing.
That was honestly why I ended up falling in love with this game as well. When the translation finally came out, it was just like, oh, okay, get like my true homies around and then go after this. It was great at the time. It's gonna be great now. I'm really freaking looking forward to it. But yeah, it's worth noting that for those of you who've played this before, the hack has changed it up. So the clear choices before are no longer the one true choices.
Yeah.
A simple example is that Kevin, could you highlight him real quick for me? Yeah. So Kevin and Hawk, the guy right next to him, they used to be the best fighters in the base game because they're the only ones that attack twice when you hit the attack button. Well, now their attacks have been nerfed a little bit to make up for that. So everything is weirdly balanced now. It's it's a lot more fun actually.
Yeah. So let's do a quick run through of the characters then. In the top left, highlighted right now, you've got a guy called Duran, who is a Knight of Forsena. He's right here. Fighter, Land of Forsena. So let's go back to the character side soon. As you can imagine, Duran is a character that's focused around hitting people pretty hard with a sword. That's what he's good at. But in this game, there are class changes as well. So characters can become a light class or a dark class, and what they get in terms of spells and abilities changes based on that. And then even further down the line, you can then go light, dark, dark, light, and dark, dark. So Duran ends up being quite a different character either side of light and dark. Light Duran has lots of healing spells and lots of buff spells. I think the buff spells are being newly added by the ROM hack, actually, which is going to be very interesting.
It has indeed, and one of his big claims to fame in the original was that his light incarnations could equip a shield, which made him the most physically resistant person in the game. That has changed a little bit in that equipment has also been broken up quite a bit, so other characters can equip shields now. Though I'll admit I'm not entirely clear on who can and can't right this moment.
It's going to be odd because we know some of the changes, but we don't know everything. So this run for us is kind of semi-blind because we know the base game inside out, but we have no idea what's happening to the mod.
Expect to see us get our asses handed to us once or twice, but I promise we will cut out repetitive ownings.
Oh yeah, definitely. That would be so boring to watch, just us dying over.
Yeah, just like, oh crap, poor guy got his shit kicked in again.
So that's Duran. His dark side doesn't have a shield, but hits very, very hard, and gains saber spells. Saber spells are things that you can use to enchant weapons, and they give them like fire powers or the power of water or ice, and that makes him very, very hard hitting. So that's kind of what you want to see with Dark Side Duran. So you want a guy that hits hard, you want a guy that has a shield, pick Duran as one of your favorite characters. Going down to the bottom left. So I mentioned that there were 3 separate final bosses. Characters that are in a vertical row from each other, vertical column from each other, share the same story. So if you pick Duran, he goes to the same final boss as the next character here, who's called Angela. And let's look at her. She is a magician, lives in the Kingdom of Altiana. Unsurprisingly, being a magician, she has tons of spells, and we'll chat through them in a bit.
Sure. Yeah, we'll go with tons of spells. I'll let everybody in on that joke when we actually start playing, because that is always one of the funniest things about this game to me.
Yeah. So, Angela is interesting in that her light side focuses on having basically a spell for every single occasion. And so she'll have literally a spell for every single elemental weakness a boss can possibly have, and they'll be powerful at that. You will see how ridiculous this gets later on in the game. And her dark side doesn't have as many spells, but what spells she does have hit harder and tend to have really weird status effects with them as well, depending on where you go on the dark side, whether it be dark or dark light. And so she has a story with Duran. I tend to see their story as being about medium. It's about the second hardest story that you'll find in the game. And one other thing to note is, if you pick Duran, and then you pick Angela, who's on the same path, they'll have unique dialogue with each other that other characters just won't have.
It's very heavily implied there's like a suppressed romance between the two of them, which is kind of hysterical considering the political situation between their respective countries.
Oh, we'll get into that if we see them in their story as well. So those are those two characters. Both of them I enjoy playing. Both of them are interesting. They tend to just be the kind of default characters, I find anyway, because of how their story is about the second hardest, how Durin's the fighter that you end up mousing over the first time you ever play the game to begin with. So moving to the right, we have Kevin. Kevin is a beastman from the Beast Kingdom, and this means that he is a pretty different character to basically everybody else. So Kevin's basic mechanic is that at night he turns into a werewolf and runs around punching people really, really hard because he's a giant werewolf. And so that makes Kevin an interesting character to play because there's a cost-benefit to it. Enemies at night tend to be harder than enemies during the day, so it depends on whether you want the extra power or not.
It's worth noting, however, that the bosses I can't think of a single boss that changes from night to day. So a part of the trade-off becomes: do you want to go through a dungeon when it is harder to get to the boss and have all of your advantages splayed out for you? It ends up throwing a really interesting monkey wrench into the usual dungeon crawling formula.
Yeah, Kevin was notable, as Coolguy mentioned earlier, for being hilariously overpowered in the base game. He was
he
was absolutely ridiculous.
He particularly with a couple of his level up evolutions, he would be hitting as hard as Duran, but because he has two fists, he punches twice. So yeah, it got bad.
Yeah. So I've always viewed Kevin's story and Person Below Makali's story to be probably the easiest one in the game, but that might be just because Kevin is just so hilariously overpowered that he ruins everything. Notably, this has been changed in this version, so he might not be nearly as strong as he used to be.
From what I understand, there were rather the threads that I was reading on the ROM hack. There was an enormous amount of effort put into making sure that Kevin was competent but not overpowered, because that was the biggest thing the ROM hacker feared was basically inverting the problems of the original game.
Yeah, I have read the patch notes for this game. I don't understand how they all gel together, but a tremendous amount of work has gone into trying to make this as balanced as it physically can be. It is quite stunning how much work has gone in. But to get back to Kevin, Kevin's light side and dark side are actually quite similar to the way Durin's works. His light side gets healing and buff spells, although they're different buff spells to what Durin will get. He mainly gets stuff that will increase your critical chance, and other things like that. And so he's unique in that he is also quite tanky, probably less tanky than Durin is, but then has access to healing that I think is slightly better than Durin's. His dark side, again like Durin, means that he hits harder and has techniques that allow him to exploit weaknesses a little bit more. But mainly, Kevin's dark side is probably one of the most boring dark sides in the game, because he doesn't get anything until his final transformations. So, whilst I like playing Kevin, in terms of, I just enjoy physically playing him, he might not be the most interesting thing to follow if we end up going dark side with him. So let's move on. Next character down is Kali, who is the resident child of the Secret Mana series. They always seem to have one. Don't worry, guys. She's 15. We promise.
Christ. I like to block her out as the spiritual sequel to the sprite in the original Secret of Mana.
Oh, definitely. So Kali has a story with Kevin. It's about the easiest one that you'll find, and she I found her in the base game to be about as overpowered as Kevin was, because she has access to a spell that restores her mana and a spell that heals people. So she was just unlimited healing for the entire game.
Yup, basically like every other game of this type, doing damage is great, and you should attempt to do as much damage as you can. But at a certain point, it's easy to tip over the resilience scale to simply be invincible.
Yeah, and so in the base game, you were completely unkillable. As far as I know, healing has been nerfed somewhat in this game as well, so she is not nearly as good as she was. But that said, she's got a few more tricks in her bag. So Lightside Kali is a character that's focused around healing, but has other tricks up her sleeve, like Turn Undead, which deals, I think, 999 damage to undead enemies and instantly kills them, which is ridiculous. Her darks...
Particularly when you consider a couple of bosses are undead.
Yeah, specifically, Kali's final boss is undead. Sorry, I gave that away, but I probably...
Oops.
Don't pick Kali. No, Kali's final boss is undead, so she just destroys him entirely. So I've always joked that Kevin and Kali have a path that's easy and trivialize the game themselves, which is pretty funny, but means that when I first started, I picked Kevin and picked Kali, and it was a good place to start for the game. And so there's certainly interesting characters to watch, and Kali's dark side specifically has tons of really weird spells behind it, really weird buffs and debuffs. So she's interesting to watch, even though she trivializes a lot of the game, in my opinion. Even now. And so, let's get up and look at the top right. So, undoubtedly my favorite character in this game is Hawk. I don't know why, but that's been true since I basically started playing. Hawk is a thief from the Sand Kingdom of Navarre. And his main job is to wreck people with 2 knives, and that used to be grossly overpowered, but isn't anymore. But Hawk has an array of some of the weirdest and coolest spells in the game, and that's usually why I find him so interesting anyway.
Right, everybody loves Hawk because he is such poetry in motion to watch.
Yeah, he just looks very stylish in the way that he moves around as well in the game. I enjoy playing him. So Hawk's light side is probably one of the oddest light sides in the game. So he gets some things that just do direct damage to enemies, alongside a couple of basic status effects. And then Hawk manages to get a bunch of other abilities that are completely insane. So he can put all the enemies on the screen to sleep. He can turn enemies into harmless critters. He can do things like give somebody full super meter, and they can just blow up an entire room as a result of that. It makes it one of the weirdest and most interesting light sides to see. Although, equally, he loses a bunch of damage for doing that, so he doesn't hit very hard. His dark side is more focused around being a ninja, and so he...
So good.
It is a really cool dark side. He gains a bunch of abilities that mainly are focused around debuffs that can either go single target or multi-target. He then gets a bunch of other abilities that allow him to probably be one of the biggest ass-kickers of bosses in the game. He gets stuff that allows you to use maximum HP down on bosses, for example. And that is completely insane.
He like the greatest thing about Hawk's casting as a ninja is that in addition to doing decent elemental damage, he also applies debuffs, and this at least in the base game scaled with his dexterity, which is something you wanted a ton of on him anyway. Part of the way they balance him, and I feel this is really clever, is that now his jutsus are scaled off of his luck instead, which is generally a much less interesting stat, though it has been buffed up quite a bit.
Yeah, so luck was a stat that you basically never took any points in for any reason, because the base application of luck in the game was broken, so it didn't do anything that it was meant to do because of bugs, and it didn't do anything to increase damage or improve your survivability, so you just never used the stat at all. So I think it's a really good change to have made, and it means that Hawk is now a character with a little bit more stat diversity, which means that he's not quite as amazing as he used to be, but that probably makes him a little bit more interesting to play. And then finally, we have Lise. So Lise and Hawk share a story. I view their story as probably being the hardest in the game. I think their final boss is definitely the hardest.
Yeah, their final boss is widely considered the most obnoxious one at the very least.
Yeah, definitely. So, Lise is a princess of the Wind Kingdom of Rolanti. Let me just her. And she's an Amazoness. I don't know why they had to write Amazoness. Amazon would probably work as well, but there you go.
I'm actually familiar with this one because I'm an irredeemable nerd who had 20 hours of Japanese learning in college, or 20 credit hours rather, and it's more true to the original kanji that they used for her. It was basically warrior woman, only the woman portion was doubled up. So if you just called her Amazon, that would be fine, but it would be dropping some of the meaning there.
I never knew that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, sorry. like I said, I followed the translation of this game very closely.
Wow, that's incredible. I never knew that. Right. You've thrown me now, because I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I'm going to spend ages figuring out this stuff. No, so Lise has a light side that's based around buffs, and a dark side that's based around debuffs. That's what she does, and she excels at it to the extent that nobody else in the game does. She is unique in that I think that she partners up with the character on her story better than anybody else does. Since usually, if Hawk gets debuffs or goes into light side and gets some sort of buffs, Lise can go the opposite way, and then you've got both on both sides.
And buffs and debuffs are insanely good in this game.
They are really important. There's no way about it. They are some of the most important things to have on any team, really. And you guys could mire us with like a team that's terrible, but we ask you not to.
We'll figure it out, I'm sure.
We'll figure it out, I'm sure, but please don't. So Lise also has some unique things in that she's the only character in the game that gets summons at the end of the game, and her light, dark, all her individual classes get a unique summon at the end of the game based on which class you pick. And we'll go into those when we get to the class changes, but it's a completely unique thing about her character that literally nobody else gets, which I like. And so that is basically a summary of all the characters. So what I would recommend happens in the thread is that everybody picks the character they want to see the story of, and then picks two other characters that they want to see on that story. We'll tally them up, and the character that was picked for the main story first will get the main story, and then we'll pick the other two characters based on how popular everybody else is. And ideally, we'll run through with that team, but in the background, I'll run through with the other team that we didn't take as well, so we can see one of the other endings and all that kind of stuff, for when it's unique and different from what's going on there. But that should be it, I think, for this introduction to Seiken Densetsu 3. Anything to add, Coolguy?
Nope, I'm good. I can't freaking wait. I'm stoked for this.
It's going to be really fun. It's just going to be amazingly fun, and I just want to see how many times we die. I'm kind of mortified by the fact that we might die constantly, and I have to do this 100 times, but I think it'll be okay.
It's not. I don't think it's gonna be that bad. Particularly with a lot of like the basic AI shortcomings. There's some crazy nonsense you can do in this game. I know that they've updated the boss AI on a number of things, but you can get clever. And if we need to get clever, we'll get clever.
We definitely will. And one other thing, once we've got a finalized party, I will ask for people to name the characters, because we can change the names. You've seen it here. Now, I expect some silly things, but you can also equally keep everyone's name the same, and it won't really matter. So that'll be one last thing to vote on as well. But beyond that, I think that's everything we've got to say.
Looking forward to it. Take good care of yourselves out there, folks, and let us know what you want.
Great. I'm super excited about this, and thanks very much for watching. We'll catch you guys next time.